So my plan for this video was to make a longer, more comprehensive video about election polling, modeling forecasts, and predictions. However, I was too busy procrastinating on that. And now, it's November 3rd, 2 days before the United States closes off one of its most bizarre presidential races of the 21st century. I still want to make that video, but for now, I would like to give my own hot takes about this election. Let's start with the basics. How does someone win a presidential election? As many of you may know, the popular vote, the total number of votes a candidate receives, does not determine the election. Instead, the United States uses the Electoral College. In this system, each state gets a certain number of electoral votes that is equal to 2 more than the number of House seats in the state. Most states award their electoral votes to the candidate who won a plurality within the state, no matter if the candidate won in a landslide or in a tightly contested race. Whichever candidate gets 270 or more electoral votes becomes the president. If no candidate receives 270 electoral votes, the House of Representatives chooses the president in a way that is so arbitrary that I do not feel the need to explain that in detail right now. The important thing is, states get a certain number of electoral votes, and the candidate that wins the state gets all of the electoral votes, unless that state is Nebraska or Maine, but we'll go over that later. Okay, now that we have the groundwork, we know that we should focus on how individual states will vote rather than the popular vote poll. I will be using Yapums to show my prediction. Blue will be for Kamala Harris, and red will be for Donald Trump. The darker the shade is, the more likely that state will vote for the candidate, and vice versa. Oh, and one last thing before starting my analysis. I want to be open and honest with my prediction and my own personal beliefs. Due to my own personal convictions, I wish to stress that this video in no way endorses a belief in totally unbiased coverage. As most of you may know, a lot of YouTube election pundits will enter with their own assortment of biases and desires for a particular outcome. Not to name names, but one's political leanings can influence their prediction. Due to this, it is important to mention that I do support Kamala Harris for president. However, I will try my best to not let that influence my prediction, but feel free to keep that in mind. I will start by selecting states that I consider safe for either candidate. This means that, unless a nuclear apocalypse starts now or there is some unpredictable shift in the electorate that we do not know about, these states will 99% of the time vote for this candidate. There is often a fascination with the idea that these safe states could shift over to the other side dramatically in a presidential election, especially among the terminally online.
It was one of Obama's strongest states. Obama won the state by almost 30 points, then Trump cuts that to 15. If you carry the trend over,
if these trends continue, hey!
I can understand that this is an interesting thought, but Rhode Island will safely go in Kamala's column this year, as well as all of these other states. An unexpected pair of safe Democratic states would be Colorado and New Mexico. These states have traditionally been competitive states in previous elections. However, there is hardly any polling to indicate that any of these states are in play, and these states have been trending Democratic for the past few cycles. Due to this, I think it is fair to say they are not in play. And now here are the safe Republican states. We now stand with Kamala Harris at 196 electoral votes, and Donald Trump at only 122. We now enter the land of likely. I would be surprised if these states voted differently, but it wouldn't be impossible. Let's say there's at most a 10% chance of these states flipping over to the other side. Let's look at the likely Republican states. This includes Alaska, Texas, Ohio, and Florida. Alaska is unlikely to vote Democratic statewide, however, it is not necessarily impossible. In 2022, Mary Peltola, a Democrat, won a statewide House race by a narrow margin, so I wouldn't discount the possibility as impossible, but I would be shocked if the state did not end up going with Trump. Texas is a funny state since it has trended Democratic for years now, but has yet to enter the true toss-up territory. In 2016 and 2020, pundits determined that Texas was not ready to vote for a statewide Democrat, and 2024 appears to be no different. Still could happen, and I expect the margin to stay in the single digits, but the state definitely is not competitive. While Ohio has been a traditional swing state, this title has likely been lost. Due to shifts amongst the white working class, the state is very unlikely to shift to the Democratic Party, especially not in this presidential election. Florida is also a funny state. It used to be a pure toss-up state, but that description has slowly been eroded. This seems partially due to the fact that the percentage of Republicans moving to the state is 40 points higher than the number of Democrats. There is no indication that Florida will be competitive this year. As for Democratic likely states, we have Maine statewide, New Hampshire, Virginia, and Minnesota. The polling in Maine, New Hampshire, Virginia, and Minnesota has indicated the race may be slightly close for Democrats, but ultimately will remain in Kamala's favor. Oh yeah, I forgot. Maine and Nebraska. Both of these states use a unique system that differs from the winner-take-all systems of other states. In these states, the electoral votes are split up. Since the number of electoral votes is equal to 2 more than the number of House districts, each House district is given an electoral vote, while the person who wins the state as a whole gets 2 extra electoral votes. This leads to an interesting curiosity that these states can give electoral votes to both Kamala and Trump. In the case of Nebraska, the 2nd district is likely Democrat, and in Maine, the 2nd district is likely Republican. Before we reach the true toss-up category, we have one more state, Iowa. Iowa is a traditional swing state, but has not been in recent years. I originally had this state as likely Republican, until recent breaking news. The gold standard pollster of the state, Selzer, found that Kamala Harris was up in the state by 3 percentage points. This is shocking because in 2020, Trump carried the state by a whopping 8 percentage points. This would imply an 11-point shift towards Democrats in the state. While I am skeptical that Democrats will win the state, I think it is more likely than 10%, so I will place it into the lean Republican category. What we are left with is a map which I think is most universally agreed upon, besides maybe some of my likelihood ratings. Kamala Harris has 226 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 219, and there are 93 electoral votes left on the table in 7 swing states. At this point, there are 7 squared, or 49 different possibilities for this election, which cover both Harris wins, Trump wins, and strangely enough, a possible tie. And honestly, according to polls, it is hard to make a prediction besides just vibes. Honestly, it is a bit dumb for me to make a prediction based on data that is so inconclusive. But I will do so anyways for funsies. In this prediction, I am assuming a Kamala underestimation. I will be honest with you, it is not a smart idea to flatly assume that. But neither is to assume a Trump underestimation. We cannot know for sure which side will be over or underestimated until the election is finished. The justification for my prediction is that several states in 2022 were overestimated for Republicans due to bad polling practices by some pollsters, which artificially gave some Republicans a lead that didn't actually exist. This was seen in races like the Arizonan and Wisconsin gubernatorial races, and the Georgian and Pennsylvanian Senate races. I will assume this happens again. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. Anyone's got about a 2% chance of predicting the way states will vote, assuming these are true toss-ups. With that, I predict that all of these toss-ups will go into Harris's column. Michigan and Wisconsin are probably the most likely to end up that way, while Arizona and Georgia are the least likely. This leaves us with a Harris win at 319 electoral votes, while Trump only has 219. This means I project a Harris win. Yet this election will almost certainly be close and tense. I don't claim to be some kind of electoral god, since frankly no one is. With an election this close, you might as well go gambling rather than make a prediction. Do you agree with my prediction? Do you disagree with any of my individual state calls? Let me know in the comments. And with that said, goodbye. Yeah. As I read this, it is 3:45 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Woo!